Hello, friend, and welcome to this episode that deserves its own special, unique introduction because the conversation can get a little intense at times. It can be confronting. It can feel sometimes challenging to listen to as a man. And I wanted to just give this preface up front. It's about sex, yes, but it's not about how to be the best technically skilled lover. It's not about how to boost your performance in bed. It's about another really important aspect of sex that is crucial to dive into if we want to be truly strong, powerful, integrated, and positively impactful sexual men. Today, I'm interviewing a man named Misha, who I found because I was looking up information about ISTA, which is the International School of Temple Arts. They're an organization that has come under scrutiny and criticism over the past bunch of years because of some of the behavior of some of their instructors. And I found Misha because he was somebody who was directly involved with creating repair processes for the organization and the individuals involved. And I thought, wow, this guy looks really interesting. And this is his profession, to help people learn from and integrate and acknowledge and heal the harm that they've caused in the world. And I thought, wow, this needs to be a conversation. This needs to be on the podcast because this is a crucial missing piece for so many of us. I just want to be clear that I am not up here on some pedestal saying you need to heal your sexual harm, and I've never caused sexual harm. I've definitely caused harm to people, even in my current relationship with my current partner. And it's a journey. It's a process of navigating it and learning to create repair. I learned a ton from this episode. I learned a ton. Lots of really useful, practical, actionable things in this episode that you can take into your life, into your current relationships, into your past relationships, and create healing and navigate them with much more ease and clarity and create really positive outcomes. And that, again, is so crucially important if we want to be strong, powerful, positively impactful, sexual integrated men. So thank you again for being here. Let's get into today's episode. My basic understanding is that you're somebody who's come from a unique background, who started a lot of different big projects in the world and nonprofits and had a big impact. And then at a certain point you realized, oh, somehow, I'll speak as if I'm you. Somehow I've been hurting certain people in the process, and my impact therefore isn't as positive or powerful as it could be. Ooh, I need to examine this. I went through your own process and came out the other side and realized just how important it is to do integrity work, and then eventually got to the position where you are now, which is a man who supports other men deepening into their integrity so that they can be better community leaders and people, etc. Is that accurate? And welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, let's start it. I feel like it's the perfect way to start a leadership and integrity podcast. It's just so like such lofty and ambitious topics.
Totally.
is to talk about like, okay, like how did I come to this? It's most people's first questions or curiosity.
Yeah.
I didn't have a big call out. I didn't have like someone who was like, or like a group of people calling me out or do the big cancellation thing. That was never my truth. Mm-hmm. I did have moments of realizing that the way that I was conducting myself, especially around sex, were out of my integrity and yet very, very much like ingrained in me. Mm. Moments when I realized that I'd placed my agenda over attunement in sexual relations. Moments where I realized, oh my God, like I have been willfully ignoring the realities of what it would mean to be an ethical human in this interaction, in this dynamic, like kind of letting myself get away with fuckboy dynamics. Excuse me if I'm going to say that.
You can say fuck, you can say pussy.
Yeah, I mean, I try not to curse with. Anyway, whatever. But yeah, that like fuckboy dynamics in the sense of like just kind of saying whatever I felt like without thinking about the repercussions, engaging in inadvertent love bombing, inadvertent breadcrumbing dynamics with women. Of course, never maliciously, but that's not the point. And just having these moments of realizing, again and again, I am someone who everybody says I'm a good man. Everybody experiences me as a good man. I get a lot of that feedback, and yet I'm still capable of immense harm. I'll also just name that I had an episode many years ago, over a decade ago, in which I was in the context of a very bad breakup, hurt a woman, like actually hit her, in the course of a big breakup fight. And we both got physical. It was the first time, only time that I've gotten physical, but it was a huge wake up call for me to like talk about, to realize how capable, sweet, conscientious, feminist, men who like have always been getting this like feedback from women of like, oh, you're so different, it's so wonderful, you're so evolved, how capable we are of harm. And in fact, as I've gone through my career, I've really ended up focusing mostly on men who have a feminist bent, who want to be good men in the world, who want to be men of integrity, who want to be progressive, and not just how capable they are of harm, but how much more capable, interestingly, their feminism or their progressive stances make them of doing harm.
Yeah.
Because we receive so much trust, such that when from particular women, such that when we do harm, it feels like betrayal.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So much for sharing that intro and that personal piece from over 10 years ago. And
yeah,
I want to normalize also that like all of us, I'll just go ahead and say pretty much 99% of men at some point have hurt people unintentionally, like that's just what happens. And we're not bad because of it. If you're listening and you've done this, like you're not bad because of it. You're not a bad person. You're not worthless, etc. But it's an opportunity to grow and to evolve and then to come into better relationships with people in general. So I'd like to name that up front. And I also want to just say, because you mentioned it, and I'm sure some people are thinking it right now, like you said, oh, in the heat of the moment, over 10 years ago, you actually hit your partner or ex-partner. Some people will probably think like, oh, well, this means this guy has no room to talk on the realm of accountability or something like that too. So I'd love it if you could just like speak to that for a little bit. Like what sort of systems have you set in place? How have you worked to address that within yourself so that you can then help other people?
Oh, sure. Yeah, thanks. And I mean, yeah, this is there's unresolved, like it's given me like a lot to grow on. The biggest, there's many things. That night alcohol was involved, and I'm now 3 years sober. I don't do drugs or alcohol at all. But there's, that's a big one. That's a real big one.
Yeah.
There's also a lot of like personal growth learning work that I've done to like evolve myself to the point where like I can recognize the signs of rage or anger, where I can mitigate that, where I can catch myself way earlier in any kind of like trigger process, where I can and have very successfully avoided the kinds of dynamics that were present in the relationship that she and I had, which was in many ways a really unhealthy relationship where we were egging each other on in really, really unhealthy ways. And yeah, I've come to like through therapy, through coaching, through men's work, I've come to recognize those dynamics and avoid them and make sure I'm not having any kinds of giant incoherences in my life, where there are these kind of like just don't look at that part of my life. Like everything else looks good, right? Like that the life is genuinely coherent, even under a microscope. And I could hold my head up about that. I've gotten psychologically okay with my own sexuality and my own shortcomings in a way that like I'm much less easily triggerable. I think part of that episode and a lot of my own insecurities was about anyway, without getting too much into my own psychodrama, like see like what like triggered a lot of my own insecurities around being around being a failure, and being ultimately like deeply callous. I was really really, really resistant against the idea that I didn't care, and I've I've reconciled a lot of that. I'm 42 now, and I was in my 20s.
Yeah.
You know, like I've been on my own personal growth journey. But I think one of the big takeaways, and I really want to name this. And first of all, I want to like hold the space for like anybody hearing about this and feeling their own pain, either having caused it or having been hurt.
Mm-hmm.
You've heard the expression that hurt people cause hurt, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hurt people. I mean, that's true, but I think we all hurt people. I don't think you need to like be able to like isolate like I was really well loved. I come from a really loving background. I come from a financially abundant background.
Mm-hmm.
There is a trauma of alienation in privileged people, where there is some sort of a pain of being divorced from the collective human experience. But ultimately, like I don't carry a lot of trauma in my body. Like I've taken trauma certification courses as part of my work with men. Like I've taken abuse courses. Like you don't have to be someone who has experienced a lot of pain to be capable of causing a lot of pain.
Yeah.
You know, like we're all part of the human drama, regardless of how much trauma we carry in our body, how much like whether or not we had nice parents. I don't think that like the fact that you had nice parents it immunizes you from being capable of causing pain or from having all sorts of weird insecurities that need to get worked out. And that was actually a big lesson for me. And it's something I've carried through of helping otherwise very good men see their capacity to do harm.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much. And also for context, I noticed on your website, you referenced that you have also like proactive accountability options for people.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
and we can go into that and like, should anybody,
let's go into it. Let's go into it. Like,
I'd like to start in a different place first, but I just want to mention like, it seems like you have systems in place that are set up to where if there are problems that arise, people can address them and you want to be addressed. Like you're an open door and reaching for this sort of a thing. Right. And,
for sure. I mean, like, okay, so like, let's just talk about that briefly.
Okay.
Briefly.
Yeah.
Right. Redundant systems of support, men's group, coach, therapist, psychiatrist, sobriety, temple, rabbi. Like I have multiple overlapping and redundant systems of support. I have cultivated community that like speaks to me and that like I can be in relationship with in a way that like I don't have to hide. That's critical.
Yeah.
And yes, I have supervisory structure that I've created for myself proactively. It was not like demanded of me by my community, but it was definitely something that I saw looking around like needed to happen. So you can, I welcome feedback, even the saltiest, angriest feedback. I welcome people telling me that I've hurt them, and I promise not to greet it with defensiveness or minimization. And I've proactively set up a system for when people like don't think that I'm safe. If people don't think I'm safe, they can go to two external supervisors who I trust, but who are not beholden to me, who have their own independent jobs and incomes. And you can tell them, hey, I think Misha's dangerous, or I think Misha's I don't think Misha should be doing his work. And I'm never immune to that.
Yeah.
I never think I'm above that. And those people, Marsha Baczynski wrote the book, Creating Consent Culture. And Angel Adioha has been a transformative justice facilitator for 20 years, and they now run Folsom Street Fair, which is the largest leather and kink event in the world. And those two people have agreed to like effectively be supervisory in it, right? And I also have regular check-ins with them. I go over like ethical questions that are coming up. You know, how did I handle this kind of client? Like how should I handle this issue or this opportunity, et cetera?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah. Thanks for that context. That's awesome. And I think it's really important to frame the conversation, like this is like, we're looking at ultimately how to be a better man, right? How to be a man that has positive impact in the world. So some people will be listening to this and thinking like, oh, well, cool. That's cool for him. Like how does that apply to me? Right. And really really, I want to go into the realm of specifically talking about people who are in some kind of position of leadership or power or something like that. And so for example, like if you're somebody out there who leads a class on something, if you're leading a workshop, if you're leading an experience, if you've written a book, if you're like hosting a show, if you're like X, Y, and Z, what else, what is power,
Oh, okay.
and I know that's kind of a jump, but just like,
no, let's do it.
If you're somebody who like gives something, provides something to society where people can look at you and be like, oh, this is the person that does this thing. Like this episode is really for you, to become better at that, to become more effective. And I think it starts with a question of what is power? What is power? Because all of those positions come with a certain amount of power, whether or not we want them. Me, like I have a certain amount of power now too. I have a very large social media following. Like I'm a sexologist. I'm an established sex educator. Like there are certain projections and weights and powers that people give me, some that I'm probably not even aware of still. And like that impacts how I relate with people and interact with people. So I'll just pause and ask you, like, in your mind, what is power in those contexts?
I use a really general, broad definition because I found that the most effective way of thinking about power is broad and malleable. I think power is the ability to impact and influence others. Right? In terms of, if we're talking about interpersonal power, which I think we are.
Yeah.
You can also talk about intrinsic power within. You could talk about like, the power that we can achieve together if we all unite. But I think right now we're talking about interpersonal power dynamics and mostly power over.
Yeah.
What does it mean for us to hold power or someone to project power onto us? The other thing I'll say just right up front about power is that power is dynamic. It's really easy in a politically progressive context to think of power as static. As like, this is, like he's the white guy in the room, so he's got to hold all the power, and that's just what it is. It's really important, I think, to think about power as dynamic and flowing, that power shifts even as the conversation goes along, that power shifts as we all get older or younger. There's a great example that one of my consent educator mentors shared of like they work in intimacy coordination for Hollywood movies. And they told a story of a movie set in which a very established actress, a very famous established actress was on the set, but she was older. And then there was a much younger ingenue actress, and they who were both on the set, and they hadn't met, and they both were like avoiding each other for the first day because both of them had this intimidation, right? Both of them had projected that the other person held more power, right? The young woman was like, this is like, she won an Oscar. And the old woman was like, this woman's about to replace me. This is where this woman is where all the male gaze is going, all the attention is going, and she represents everything I fear. And so both of them had this, right? So like power is also both dynamic and also perceived, right? Like perception, it plays a role. You were talking about the projections that people might be putting on you that you might not be aware of. I think it's really important to recognize, if you're you, how much power that confers on you, whether or not you hold a specific formal position of authority over anybody, right? Like, informal power is often far more relevant than formal power. Formal power is almost easier to spot, right? Like, I know that my boss has power over me, right? Like, got it. That's pretty basic, right? Informal power, like this person knows everybody at this event and I don't know anybody. This person is a consent educator and I am automatically, without even consciously acknowledging it, giving them the benefit of the doubt for this kind of sketchy shit that's happening right now sexually between us. That's the stuff that where I see a lot of clients, especially my male clients, messing up because in the minds of, maybe this resonates with you, Taylor, or in the minds of a lot of men that I've spoken with, when I talk about power, they're like, well, I'm not Elon Musk. I'm not Donald Trump. I'm not the head of a Fortune 500, whatever. I'm not looking like these guys on Instagram on private jets. So I don't have any power. What are you talking about? I was unpopular in high school, you know? What are you talking about? You know, like I still have to work for a living. How could I hold any power? Right. So our self-conceptions can betray us. And this is where I see a huge amount of harm occurring generally is, it's the failure to acknowledge our own power.
Yeah. Can you speak a little bit more to that? Like, I think that's
Sure.
super juicy. Like, yeah, like say more. Like the failure to acknowledge our own power. Like, so okay, there's consent educator who.
Here it is. Here it is. Yeah. Like people don't know. Okay. So like what I do professionally is I support men who generally are either trying to prevent themselves from causing harm from their position of power, or who have caused harm in their position of power, and want to use it as a source of growth and evolution. Often that involves like really engaging in the work of repair, which involves really engaging in the work of understanding impact and conducting like deep seated behavior change, transfer, and like psychological transformation. One of the biggest sources of psychological transformation that I help my clients to see is the degree to which they hold power. Because not universally, but like 90% of the time in my work with clients, it isn't actually the actions that they've done, right? It's not like this person assaulted in it, right? And that's the problem. It's usually this person was just a little pushy, but from a position of power that they failed to recognize. And then when we all brought it to their attention, they got defensive. And when we talked about the way that like the person that they were being pushy to was like intimidated by them, they denied that was possible. And it's in the denial, it's in the defensiveness, it's in the abdication of power that the real harm tends to occur. And that, okay, I'm going to say that again. Yeah. So it's not in the original act. It's in how they were with realizing the act. And so specifically around power, around not being able to see, like I talked to a client yesterday who was, has gone through his journey. And the issues that were raised about him had everything to do with, he doesn't get the influence and that he has and the responsibilities that come with that. That it's, even if all the people that and this is, this particular client was in sex positive communities. Yeah. There was a lot of like hooking up with lots of people. Even if all those people feel good about it, even if no one feels bad about it afterwards, he's still impacting the broader field in the indiscriminate and power ignorant ways that he's conducting his own sex life. I'm actually going to put this point up front because I always save it to the end, but I think it's so important, Taylor. Like most of us are operating right from a very, very ingrained position around sex and power, which is, you with me?
Yeah.
All's fair in love and war. And so long as it's two consenting adults, no one should be able to say anything. In fact, it's actually sex negative and shamey, right? To critique someone's sexual choices, so long as it was two consenting adults. So a 55-year-old man in a position of power sleeping with his 25-year-old secretary, so long as they're consenting, right? Let's just not even make it her secretary. Maybe it's just like a 25-year-old ingenue who comes into his community, right? Let's just say it like that, right? There's no technical position of power even. Let's say that he's not even a teacher. Let's just say he's a community leader, and let's not even say he's the organizer of the space. Let's just say that he's really well established, right? 25, 50, just the age difference alone and the experiential difference will create a ripple effect around him. And now let's say that he is in charge of big communities, maybe that she is in or out of, but it doesn't really matter because everybody in his community now doubts his judgment. And this woman doesn't have to be harmed by him for people to doubt his judgment. And this runs against so much of what we've believed about like being sex positive and being open and like saying, look, it's all good so long as everybody's consenting. The whole consent framework. This is one of the things about going beyond consent. Like consent can't be our only barometer of harm. If it is, we're lost. Because we will ascribe harms that aren't actually consent violations using the language of consent violation, which confuses everybody, right? I'm sure we've all seen that, right? Where guys are like, oh, I didn't consent violate. And 3 years later, like trying to make sense of it, she's putting it into the language of consent violation. You know, we're trying to make consent do too much of the work. Like the point is that oftentimes things are consensual, but also really harmful. And I think what most of us want is to prevent harm. I think when we talk about consent, what we're really talking about is let's prevent harm.
Yeah.
And if we're going to do that, that's a deeper question, and frankly, almost a different question, because there's plenty of things that are consensual that can still be harmful.
Totally.
And this is not just my point. I'm going to cite some really beautiful influences right now. Amiya Srinivasan, an Oxford philosophy professor who wrote a very controversial and amazing book called The Right to Sex. She makes this point about teachers and students often that like, yeah, the teacher and student might be having consensual sex, but it's impacting the ability of everybody else to learn. Everybody else in the classroom can't learn as well from a teacher who's sleeping with their colleague, with their fellow student, right? Catherine Angel just came up with an amazing book called, quoting Michel Foucault, called Tomorrow Sex Will Be Good Again. She's also a British academic for some reason. That's where some of the most amazing thinking is coming out of for consent theory. She makes the point of why would we believe, like, why would we think that we can always know what we want? Like consent orients towards everybody being these rational actors and being able to know exactly what we are all gonna, like, what we all want and what we are gonna want, which isn't true. Like that's not how human sexuality works, right? You work in sexuality. That's not how things are. So like, also Clementine Morgan from Canada, she has come up with the attunement model of consent, which is amazing, right? And it talks about like, it contrasts itself with the contractual model. It says like, the contractual model is problematic for its lack of eros, right? Of like agreeing to every step, but it's also problematic for its inability to prevent harm, right? That like, again and again, let's come back to this. Let's, as a place to orient.
Yeah.
Right? Like, yes, we should aim for pleasure, but I think we should also aim to prevent harm. And I don't think consent as it's currently construed gets us there. It's important, God knows.
Yeah.
But I don't think that we should limit our conversation exclusively to it. We should talk about harm.
I'm thinking of a number of scenarios right now in my own community and examples that I've seen where consensual sexual interactions have happened. And technically it's within the realm of consent, but massive harm happened from it. And then there was massive fallout. But then because it was technically consensual, it's like, I don't have responsibility for that. And then I can see I can see how that right there, like that's the trigger point, you know, like that's the incendiary, like that right there is the shit that will blow it up and actually create more harm. And so the defensiveness, the blaming, the reversing of like, oh no, actually no, I'm the victim because you're accusing me of something when it actually was consensual. You said yes to, you know, like it's a total head fuck. And we don't have language. We don't have, right? Like, so there is in many ways, like there's a deep legitimacy in the harm. Let's start there. In the experience of harm of like, this wasn't okay. Like, yeah, technically I said yes, but he was totally unattuned and he can teach his consent. And yeah, he's totally unattuned. Like he rushed the consent conversation and that made me feel pressure. Like, yeah, I technically said yes, but like, surely we're beyond that. And yet I don't have the language to articulate anything beyond like, I felt violated. Right. So like, I feel, and let's just assume that that's authentic and valid and real. And let's like not diminish it or patronize it in any way. In fact, let's orient our entire communities around validating the reality of that pain. And if we haven't made that jump as a community yet, and we're still using collectively the language of assault and crimes and, you know, and like rape is this kind of crime and comes with this kind of punishment and this kind of social approbation, and assault is this, and, you know, then using the language of he assaulted me, right, which is about a crime, will
And I hate to even come close to even just touching on validating defensiveness because it's so destructive and it's like the defensiveness really is the problem. But I do understand the sense of like being like, well, no, I did not assault. I wasn't attuned. I abdicated my responsibility as a leader. I caused harm, but I didn't assault. Right. And we don't really, think about like, we don't even have this in our lexicon, even in super progressive communities. Right? We don't have a language, which is bananas to talk about consensual sex that was harmful. And I think we need to. Like, I think we need to have that language.
Yeah.
So that we can say this was really harm, and we can treat it seriously. Like, right? This is the other thing. Like, let's not diminish the harm because it didn't elevate to the level of a crime. Let's in fact take the harm incredibly seriously, even using a subjective scale of severity.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Saying like harm is in the eye of the harmed doer. Can we be present with the fact that this impacted this person? And the fact that it was quote consensual doesn't matter. What matters is the harm.
Yeah.
It's a harder way to live.
It is. It requires it requires more. It requires more presence.
Thank you.
More
That's a better way of saying it.
It requires more effort, more labor. And as somebody, myself or anybody else, you who's in a position of leadership, like it seems like that's a necessary part of it. You know, like right now there's all these different like sex workshops people can go to for sexual liberation, sexual expansion. Like I'm thinking like ISTA is one of the main ones that comes to mind. And I've done ISTA. I've had great experiences there. I know other people have had not as good experiences there, but I've gone to play parties. I've hosted play parties. Like there's all this stuff around like sexual liberation and openness. And also, like this conversation, I feel like needs to be more a part of it. And I look back on some of my previous experiences in these spaces, and yes, there was talk about consent, but there wasn't as much talk about all these different nuances. And I think like if we're really trying to actually advance as a sexual society, like this kind of framework needs to be in there as well. In addition to the like having your wild experiences at the play parties, sure, like de-shame all the like puritanical stuff that we've been programmed with. And then how do you navigate the reality that maybe 3 of your past partners actually felt really shitty after they had consensual sex with you, you know, like then what, you know?
Right. Yeah. And it gets to like, are the values in this community or in this space that we're holding in this play party, you know, we are here to avoid legalistic crimes against each other. Is that our standard? Right.
Yeah.
Or is our standard that we're here to engage in high risk activity that, right, where all of our traumas and triggers are evident and we're literally getting naked and doing sexual things with each other. Incredibly high risk, right? High risk physically, STI related, high risk around pregnancy, high risk around emotional harm, even physical harm. And like really honestly, this is not my original idea. I'm simply borrowing the philosophy of the drug community, which is harm reduction, right? The progressives in the drug community are like, this is a high risk activity. We aren't going to pretend that we're doing drugs without risk. We're going to say this is a high risk activity like rock climbing that we all like to do. Yeah. And we are going to orient ourselves towards preventing harm, being hyper educated, right? Being responsible in our engagement and acknowledging the potential of harm in ways that we might not have been able to predict or been able to, you know, easily predict. Yeah. Right now, I think a lot of what's happening in sex positive communities is that it's just like it's a greedy little gold rush, and we're all in our little trauma responses for, coming from scarcity and trauma and insecurity, and we're rushing at play parties and we're rushing at ISTA and other neo-tantra experiences, seeking peak experiences. And I hold myself in this too, right? Like I definitely have been consumptive and habitual and almost compulsive in my experiences of sex in the past. It's one of the reasons I took a giant step back recently. I'm 6 months celibate as well as sober. You know, like I really did, right, because I was going to a sex party a week, you know what I mean? And it was delightful and wonderful and cool and like very consensual, but it was also like kind of too much. Yeah. But like we're not, so we need to actually be in a space of harm reduction and centering the potential of harms that we can't predict and getting good at it. Right. And so I think one of the ways to be Formula One drivers with a modicum of seatbelts and helmets, right, is to be really not just consent educated, which still to this day, enthusiastic, verbal, nonverbal, everything. Most people, when they hear consent, is like, right, don't be rapey. Are we good now?
Totally.
Right. Or most people really what they hear is don't rape, frankly.
Yeah, for
right?
sure.
Don't violently rape. And like no matter of language around consent has, I think, really effectively prevented that from still being the thing. This is just the obstacle. And the obstacle is like, I guess I'm supposed to ask, but no one around here is actually asking for every step. So there's immediately, that's the other thing. There's immediately hypocrisy right away. Like, you know, if you want to come into like a sex positive community right now, you know, what's going to happen is you're going to hear a lot of people talking about how you need to have explicit consent for every step. And then you're going to look around and see nobody doing that. And you're going to immediately have this experience, this embodied experience of incoherence, which is traumatizing, frankly, right? And right, of like, these people don't do what they say they're going to do, which is bad, right? Right? Trauma education 101, you don't want your words not to match your actions, right? So like, not good, right? Like we're preaching something that nobody does. Right. Because you see people like, oh, like this person feels comfortable with him. Like he's attuned. So I felt fine with him, like running his handle on my back in that moment. Right. And then people will come in to that community and be like, oh, like, is it okay for me to do it? Is it not? Like, what are these rules? Nobody gets it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a couple of different directions we could go from this point. It's a super rich conversation. I was listening to a different podcast of yours earlier in preparation for this conversation, and because I think this material is so interesting. And you said something that resonated with me, at least. I'll just bring it personally for a moment, my own experience in community. I think you said or maybe it was a mentor of yours that said something to the effect of, as a leader, you know, when this person lets their guard down, other people have to put their guard up in a certain way. And so I'm thinking, so last night, right, totally. I'll just use my life as an example. Last night I went to an ecstatic dance in Asheville. I love ecstatic dance. I play in a live music ecstatic dance band. Like it's a great way for me to feel free, emotionally free, physically free in my body. I also love dancing with different people. I love dancing with men, with women. I love sometimes exploring flirtatious, sensual energy in the space as well. And also, like last night, I was thinking more like, what is my impact in this space? You know, like what do I want to have happen here while I was dancing? And I was like, man, I really just want to feel like free in my body. And I would like shake around and do all this stuff. And I'm aware, like I'm a relatively bigger guy. I'm tall, like I'm strong. I have status in this particular community. And I'm like, I'm sure I'm having impact on people that I can't even imagine right now. And like there was this like real big desire internally to just totally just let fucking go, you know, and like go nuts. But then like I was realizing, well, if I do that to that extreme, like it's certainly going to make other people kind of shrink down a little bit or feel something, you know. There's got to be some balance point there, or is there? And I did figure out there are ways I could get that experience in my body that felt good in the space, at least for me. And I think had a, you know, net positive impact on the space. But it's something that I was just like, I was just aware of. So when I heard you say that this morning, I'm like, oh yeah. Like I recognize the desire to be wild and free and liberated. And also as this particular person, like what is the net impact of that on space? And then what will the ripple effect of that be? You know?
Yeah. I love that you brought that up, and I'm grateful for you for using your own life, right? Like, so that was very much, Angel Adioha, my, one of my mentors and supervisors. They say, when people in power and traditionally kind of centered people let their guard down, it's often the case that others have to put theirs up. Well, let's take the shame out of this, everybody, right? Just because you're a white guy, listen to this doesn't mean that you have to like now like be ashamed or like just none of that, right? The point is, as another one of my mentors said one time, that the idea of a space in which you don't have to think about your own power and the responsibility that comes with it is I think they said it's a white supremacist wet dream. You know, it's a conceit. It's a conceit that we can ever set down our influence and our power. It's a conceit. And it's a very, very conveniently self-serving one, right? where, right. In fact, I know that for myself, right, I had to get checked on this, right, because I would go to these private, intimate play parties, mostly with people that I knew and trusted and that I knew me, you know. And my story was, oh no, these are the places where I can let my hair down. These are the places where I can be like loud and obnoxious and exhibitionistic and really take up all the space in the room and be the, you know, and not have to think about power. And in fact, it's actually healthy. It's good for everybody around me, for me to have those spaces so I can let off that steam, and there I can bring my power aware self to my professional life, right? Right. So I told myself a narrative that it was actually good for the world for me to have those spaces. And I think it's wonderful for people to have spaces in which they can be themselves. But I don't think that that necessarily translates that now you don't have to, now you get to be free of thinking about power. Now you get to be free of thinking about consent. I've seen this in my clients too. They're like, well, I thought we'd established consent. I thought I could just be myself now. You know, I thought like, since she kind of indicated that she was cool, like I thought I could just, you know, maybe smoke my joint and like not have to think about attunement anymore. Because it's kind of a burden.
Totally.
To constantly be attuning to other people. It's so much nicer to just kind of say whatever the hell I feel like and wait, you know, really, you know, make sure that I'm with people who trust me, but like just say whatever I feel. And I found that that's not true. I've just found that there is no place where like people won't be affected by you. Even your deepest friends will be affected by shit you say. Even the people that you love the most and maybe who share privilege identities with you, right? Other cis straight white guys with, you know, you can still hurt them, you know, like
totally.
You know, you can say really cutting, undermining things. And like there is no space, and there shouldn't be, right? And we shouldn't be waiting to find it in which we don't have to think about our influence and our power. But it doesn't mean that you can't dance or even dance cool and crazy, right? But like even as you're dancing crazy in the ecstatic space, like be aware of your surroundings, right? Like, oh, like am I making everybody around me stand way back? Yeah. And if I am I occupying that kind of center, right? This is I used to be in the house dance world, right? And it's like, if you're going to be the guy who's like moving your body and creating space and almost like creating the cipher around you, then like, okay, but own that space, do your dance, be expressed, and then be attuned to the collective and move out of it so that other people can in. In fact, you can even use your loudness to empower other people, and people will have this overall impression of you as not like unattuned Mr. Guy who needs all the attention on him all the time, which turns everybody off, but like, oh, this guy like created the cipher, like instigated some cool vibes, energies, and then knew, right? He could attune to the collective and knew when to pass the mic, right? And knew when to
So I think I want to sort of riff on this dance thing for a little bit, because it's such an interesting microcosm of society, right? Like in nonverbal space where people are interacting with movement, you can clearly see, just to preface also, like in the dances around here, there's the agreement, you're not going to stare, you're not going to watch people, right? But you can still people still witness the space. People still see the impact that different people have on each other. And you can see that some people have very clear patterns of impact in the space. Like some people like move around the space and try to interact with people in a way that like doesn't necessarily feel the greatest for other people. So there's kind of like this bubble that expands around them wherever they go. And people are like, oh, I'm just going to slowly move away from this person, but they're not actually violating consent. You know, they're not doing something wrong, but the vibe is like, it's a little bit iffy, you know? Whereas there are other people, and this is part of where my curiosity goes. There are other people who seem like they can embody this sort of almost it's like a generative seeding quality. Like they move through the dance space, seeding the space with positivity and connection, and they leave a positive impact with whoever they dance with. Even if they're dancing what somebody would label as sexually, somehow they're doing it in a way that feels like it has integrity, you know, and it doesn't seem to negatively impact the space as much. It's just super interesting.
But you're talking about energy.
Yeah.
And to me, like a conversation about power, harm, and consent that ends up in the conversation around energy and attunement is a good one, right? Like, so I'm really happy that we arrive here. Like I always try to. It's important to acknowledge the degree to which the esoteric energies, the kind of the ineffable, the difficult to describe energies that we carry with us impact the people around us. And again, I've read like restorative justice reports and like accounts that are all very like formal.
Yeah.
When like what the reports consist of is like his energy was just so creepy. I can't point to it exactly, and technically I did consent, but God, it just made me feel so gross the next day.
Yeah.
You know? And like, you know, so like, and people, so we're in good faith, we're trying to put to words what is like the ineffable, right? The that which cannot really fully be named. Yeah. And so there's science to attunement. There is, you know, there's proprioception, like an awareness of our body in space, and kinesthetic awareness of what your body is doing. There's there's the ability, without getting into too many other terms, there's the ability for us to like attune to where my energy is really being welcomed and invited based on your body language and the body language around me, and like really tuning in, like, oh, this person had like a little bit of an uncomfortable vibe, so I'm going to give them a little bit more space and maybe not look at them and maybe like move away, or I'm going to like slow my movements down to be less like energetically unattuned to the people around me. And at its best, ecstatic dance is an incredible petri dish laboratory for witnessing, not just like I think a lot of people come to it originally for like radical self-expression, but what it really is like, this is an attunement lab, you know? And like, if you're not already incredibly good at this, and I hold myself very, very gently as someone who is still learning.
Yeah.
You know, like I like to think I'm attuned, but like I'm still always in the process of inquiry and very much in the process of observing people who are really good at it. Sometimes naturally, sometimes as a result of a lot of practice and skill of like sensing into the people around them and like raising the vibes or doing their own thing in a way that feels like generative. Yeah. So like, yes to that. And if you're confused about this, go to ecstatic dance or go to some dance and notice.
Yeah.
Like start observing what is that? And really you start with yourself. Like, how do I feel in this person's presence? Mm-hmm. How do I feel in that person's presence? Like, how did that person did they make me feel comfortable? Did they make me feel excited to dance more? Did I feel turned off?
Totally.
You know?
Yeah. And also just to be clear, like I'm not sitting here saying that you listener or viewer on YouTube shouldn't go dance sensually or sexually or powerfully with people. I just like wanting to bring like awareness to all the layers of everything. And I'd like to shift into possibly a practical lens. Let's say, for example, there's a guy, he comes to you, he says, hey, I've gotten there's 5 or 6 reports from these different women who've said, you didn't violate my consent, but like I feel awkward and uncomfortable around you, and I feel like I've been harmed from our experience somehow. And then this guy says, well, it's not my fault. Like I didn't violate your consent, etc. Like, what would you say in that space?
Yeah. I mean, the part of the inquiry, right? And I'll just name, first of all, that like when I work with men, this is important. I'm gonna be tangential and go on a slight divergent tangent here, but only because it's important to answer the full question. I promise I will get back to it.
Cool.
The first thing I want to say is that I am not a proto-feminist wrist slap for white dudes.
What does that mean?
I come from a place of love.
Yeah.
Like my work in the world is to support mostly cis straight white guys to be their full loving selves and make the contribution they're here to make. I am not here to punish. I'm not here to condemn. I'm not here to even inadvertently kind of use the language of restorative justice to punish or condemn. I am here because I love men, because I'm honored to play this role. And so like the first thing I would do is create the trust energy with this man that I see him. Right? And that I accept that he isn't trying to cause harm. I accept even that part, right? And I might inquire with him about his relationship to harm and about his relationship to his ability to cause harm. And we might, in that process, start to uncover some of the, maybe we'll call them structures of knowing, right? That, right? Such as so long as I didn't violate consent, there is no viable, valid claim of harm possible. It's a big one, right? Which is a very understandable structure of knowing to receive from the society, because our legal system asserts it.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
Our legal system does not have a crime for creepy vibes. Right? Our legal system does not have a crime for sex that is regretted. But both of those things can cause a lot of harm. Right? So I start with an inquiry around his relationship to harm. And yes, like sometimes like that, childhood stuff comes up, his relationship to, and defensiveness will inevitably come up. But like ultimately what we try to get to in this kind of first wave of work will be a sense of his own standards of integrity, right? His own values, and specifically how it's important to him to conduct himself in the world. Is it important to me that the women I interact with feel good about my interactions with them? Or is it important to me simply just to avoid raping? It's like, all's fair in love and war. I'm a rational actor in a capitalist cutthroat society, and so long as I don't violate the law, I'm good. And you might think that there's a lot of guys like that, but I have been happily surprised to see that and maybe this is obviously there's a filtration bias here of like the only kind of guys who would come to me, but like most guys don't come to me of their own volition. Most guys come to me because they're pressured to, frankly. But when I really investigate with them, they want to be contributions in the world. They don't want to cause harm. They don't want women to regret their interactions with them. They don't want to create those waves, even if it's only because they realize that that's going to negatively impact their prospects in their various communities, in their professional lives, et cetera. But generally also because they, I know they're men, but boy, do we have empathy. Boy, do we have compassion. We just don't know how to wield our power.
Yeah. And
it's hard because we also have raging hormones and testosterone, and we have a deep-seated psychological or sociological imperative to initiate. And there's all kinds of masculine, feminine polarity stuff, and like the fear of being a cuck or beta or whatever. Maybe Gen Z can tell you on their comments if those terms are still relevant. But yeah, I start with compassion. I start and end with compassion, and I start and end with the inquiry into harm. But generally, the path is to like get to the place where the man can see that he was violating his own standards of integrity in those behaviors. Right? Get him to see that this isn't the woke police. This isn't the woke mob or the cancel mobs coming after him. This isn't feminism run amok. This is him acting out of his own integrity. But oftentimes it takes some time to see that. But once you do, it's a lot stronger a foundation than just slapping him into conformity with a set of standards that at his core he still believes are externally imposed by the woke police, right? Oh. And I use that term very, very, with a lot of intention. That's how a lot of people think. That's how a lot of men especially think.
For sure.
So I have to be cognizant of that dynamic. But yeah. So does that answer the question? Or at least come close?
Yeah, no, I think it does. And I think it's really important. I like how you humanize it. Because I see something in the field, and I notice myself like having certain judgmental qualities, characteristics sometimes where it's like, oh, this person did this thing, they're bad.
Yeah.
Or cancel. Even if I don't want to cancel them, I'm like, cut them out.
Yep.
Danger, dehumanize, like that sort of a thing. And I think for some people, especially people who have experienced the harm, perhaps that's a useful strategy for them to create safety, in their life. And also like in the context of being somebody who's helping somebody to sort of right the wrongs or like heal the harm, like there's gotta be a meeting on a human level, and
yeah. And I mean, I think it's, I think it's really, what you're saying is really important. And I really like that you're naming it from both the perspective of someone who's directly experienced harm, like say a survivor, but also from the perspective of someone who's maybe a third party observer, like what you're talking about, you being, right? I'm the guy's friend. I'm in the same dance community as him, or right, like I am her friend, right? Like, and that's the majority of us, right? The majority of the roles that we play are not harm doer or victim. They're observer. They're person impacted by what these other two people did. Yeah. And it's really easy to judge. So here's a framing that I think is really useful. If all of us are, especially your audience, I imagine, are really on board with a collective social or societal project of sexual liberation, yeah, let's go there. Then I invite us to also simultaneously embark on a project of decolonizing our minds around justice.
What does that mean?
It means not thinking in terms of there are objective standards of harm that correspond to the objective standards of crime. It means understanding that harm is subjective, right? It means not insisting on every harm being something that needs a right to a fair trial. We've seen that does not work for sexual assault, right? Right? That like it will never result in any kind of justice or healing for a community, right? That we can't be cops with each other, right? That we are not equipped to investigate each other. That demanding an investigation be done in the context of, quote, accusations itself is harmful, right? That approaching interpersonal disputes or interpersonal harm, especially within the context of community, of intentional community, through the lens of a judicial mindset, of a litigious mindset of, well, I should have the right to face my accuser. I should have the right to a fair and speedy trial. I should have the right to have evidence presented against me. I should have the right to a lawyer and an advocate, and this person should be, I should know exactly who they are. None of that applies. None of that is safe. None of that is how a good community can function.
Why?
Because all of those systems might be a decent way to run a country, but they're not a good way to run community. And we tend to recreate judicial systems within community, and we run tribunals and we exert judgment on each other. And frankly, none of it works. So when I talk about decolonizing our sense of justice, I'm talking about all of what I just said, right? And also what you mentioned of training ourselves, literally training ourselves. This is the process of decolonization. We have to train ourselves not to jump to conclusions when we hear someone did harm, right? I mean, how many of your listeners dismissed me when I said that I'd done this harmful thing 15 years ago, right? Yeah. And God bless. Like, I'm not going to insist that you accept me, but like, what does it mean, like, I hate it when people try to answer questions with questions. So I'll try to be more specific. We have to train ourselves not to assume that someone's bad when we hear that they did harm. And that often starts with training ourselves not to think that we are bad when we've done harm. Right? We have to train ourselves to be like, I did a harmful thing and I'm still a good person. Right? I did a harmful thing and and I have the ability to be with it, to be present to it, to be present to the consequences of it. It's incredibly brave, and we all have to still exist in our hyper litigious, cutthroat capitalistic society too. So like we can't pretend that that's not around us, or pretend that that's not the soup we're all swimming in and what we're bringing into our little ecstatic dance enclaves. We are bringing that world in. So we have to consciously be in the process constantly of kind of liberating our minds from that perspective. And it doesn't, and what's great about that is that when we do, as we do, we find space for compassion for people who have done harm, space for nuance, deep space for healing for the people who have experienced harm but might not have experienced a crime. Right? I think it's really important. This is a survivor-centric model. Yeah. Like just because he didn't commit a crime doesn't mean that you're not harmed, doesn't mean that you're not traumatized, doesn't mean that there aren't consequences that need to happen in order to make you safe, in order to support your healing. Yeah. Like crimes don't have to be a present for us to really take things seriously. Anyway.
Yeah, I really like how you just spoke to that, because I imagine there are a lot of people out there who have experienced harmful scenarios with somebody, and they can't really like pinpoint the specific thing. And so they feel maybe isolated or scared or frustrated and shut down and like unsure how to proceed. And it's almost this like form of possibly even self-gaslighting that can happen. We're like, maybe there's just something wrong with me, or I don't know what, something's just weird about it. But like, I like how you're
well, and gaslighting from the community, right? Like,
right.
Like a lot of I've seen survivors' friends will like kind of try to like ask questions that get to whether or not assault was committed. Mm-hmm. And they'll either convince the person that assault was committed when it wasn't, which is also destructive, right? Or they'll be like, well, it sounds like it wasn't that big a deal. Or rather, it sounds like it technically wasn't assault. So like, you know,
so deal with it.
That'll happen. Well, yeah, we'll deal with it, right? Like both of which are really, really destructive. It's really important with anybody just to be present to their experience. Yeah. You know? And especially if they're feeling really harmed, to be present to their experience and the work of, especially like, because a lot of people who have done harm then themselves get called out and feel harmed. So it's tricky. Like a tricky industry. I think it's also important, like, there's such nuance in helping someone who is feeling really indignant and defensive at the nature of their call out to like relax into what accountability there is there for them to take. And that's why, I mean, I've dedicated my career to doing that well and to doing that effectively. And it's super hard.
It's super hard. Like, I've witnessed a number of folks over the years get sort of publicly called out on Facebook or something, and I have seen their nervous systems just go totally into fight or flight, you know, and like get completely overwhelmed. And I guess I will just empathize for a moment in the sense of like, I imagine hundreds of years ago, or even prior to Facebook, like you would never have a situation where all of a sudden there's 500 people saying like horrible things about you all at once. Like, you would probably be in a community with maybe 20 people or some smaller amount of people around you, ideally in person, talking to you about this thing. So like the reality of the online call out, who knows, right? I guess I'm just thinking.
Yeah, like, not sure. Actually, public shaming is a tried and true technique, and it's been destructive for thousands of years.
Fair. I guess I'm just sort of thinking out loud about this. Like I guess you said somebody causes harm, and then they get accused, or it's brought to light that they've caused harm, and then they feel harmed in the process, right? Like, and so that, like, I guess I question, like, is empathy for them feeling harmed a useful step in them getting to the point where they can realize that they've harmed somebody else? Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very legitimate question. I think I'll start with by saying, you know, I am generally a believer in public, like adjudicating this kind of stuff in public as a, not last resort sounds too judgy, but like as a step that really needs to be taken with a lot of careful awareness, and especially usually not as a first step. Like if you haven't tried talking to someone, if you never literally tried saying to someone, hey, this hurt me, and it's safe for you to do so, and that you've got support to do so, then that's something that I think it's important to name is ideal. And I'll say that, like, a lot of the times that men who get called out, it's not because the person calling them out like was so callous as to not consider talking to them directly. It's usually because there was some degree to which the man getting called out created a very clear impression that he was not going to be receptive to, right? So oftentimes when I work with a man who's been called out, I say, oh, well, I can see two harms right away. There's whatever you're accused of doing, and there is the way that you've been such that nobody in your community felt like you would take it well when they told you directly.
Yeah.
right? Which is that you've been projecting defensiveness. You've been projecting an opposition or a high potential likelihood of gaslighting if you were to receive feedback. You have maybe received feedback and dismissed it. You have maybe received feedback and been callous about it. Especially feedback that's come as like a consistent pattern. And I mean, and there's nuance here, like, especially if you're a leader, like I'm sure you lead classes, like you might get some feedback that's kind of like, you know what, I'm taking this feedback and I'm going to not listen to it. Like, I think that I teach fine. And like 90% people love it. One person out of 100 was like, I don't like your teaching style. Like, okay, well, okay. But that doesn't mean I'm going to like radically shift my teaching style because, it's like, you have to be, there's nuance here, right?
Yeah. But if 10 people said the same thing independently,
exactly.
like that's worth looking at.
Exactly. There's right. So the energy here is not one side or another. It's discerning, right? There's just skill and discernment. It's part of the leadership. It's part of being a good leader is being able to discern, oh shit, what is there for me to see? And I think, and this needs to be mentioned, being publicly canceled is a trauma. It is, you can cite any of the trauma experts, will tell you that like losing your community and being publicly shamed by your community, like having people craft a public narrative about you, right, is incredibly traumatizing. It's incredibly destabilizing. Ostracization is akin to death psychologically, like, and not for nothing, but I've had 3 past clients kill themselves or overdose. I've had 4 past clients exile themselves from their communities and completely start over because they couldn't deal with the intensity of their ostracization. And so like I don't like here's another part of decolonizing ourselves around justice is not believing in punishment. And this is a really tough one, right? Like if you're a prison abolitionist, you got to really embrace some really tough stuff, right? Because your instinct will be like, he hurt her, punish him, right? And be justified, right? I'm righteous in my quest for punishment for him, right? And right, so like, is the call out a natural consequence of him ignoring every single is there been a group of his friends who've come to him and been like, dude, you really need to change. You need to look at this. Yeah. And he's been like, fuck you guys. It's like the call out is the last resort. We're going to call him out. They haven't changed. Like ISTA just got a big call out. Like I get it, like this organization was not shifting, right? And I'm saying this is someone, ISTA is a client, right? That just full disclosure. And that's public knowledge. But like,
let's just riff on that for a moment. Cause I think that is one of the most important pieces. I remember a previous podcast I had with Papillon, a therapist who works with sexual assault survivors. We didn't go into as many nuances around the harm piece, but what he said was that in talking with all of the victims, the people who've experienced harm, none of them wanted to go public. Like none of them wanted to really call out or that sort of a thing. And if people did something like that, it was basically a last resort because the feedback that they had given or the harm that they had expressed wasn't received well. And it was met with a wall or defensiveness or gaslighting or something like that. And I think that's so fucking important.
It's so important. And even if, I won't say anybody deserves it, but even if it was the logical consequence of a woman who had both felt harmed, didn't feel like, didn't like, saw that the guy wasn't going to take the feedback, saw that there was ongoing danger, which tends to be like the real rationale. Like the person's going to rape another person. He's going to do this again. Yeah. I'm calling him out publicly and warning other people about him because I think that he's going to do it again. Mm-hmm. Even then, it's still harmful. And I don't mean, this is real. Yeah. I don't mean that it's not valid, but can we just all take a deep breath and be with that nuance?
Yeah. It makes me think and question, it's so nuanced because in my mind, I'm like, maybe it is harmful. And also is it a net positive in terms of overall harm reduced, you know?
Sure. And it may be, and like people can do that calculation and people will debate it and there will never be a full agreement within the community. There'll be his friends who are like, fuck you guys for calling him out. There'll be like everybody else who's like, kind of felt like it was necessary. I'm glad he did his growth work. And there'll be people who are like, he's never done enough. He should just chop off his cock and never come back, you know? Totally. And like shit gets real, right? And like, and I also don't think that like, I think it's a dangerous naivete to think that people aren't motivated in part by vengeance, in part by the desire to punish, in part by the desire to equalize the playing field, in part by the desire to very reasonably like correct for millennia of gender-based inequality and gender-based harm, to radically distrust men in power, myself included, and very reasonably so. So like, I don't think that anything of these things are simple. I don't come down into a anti-cancel culture camp or a pro-cancel culture camp. I invite nuance. I invite the you know, and like, and I like, this is coming from, and I feel very confident saying this, like, even like, I'm friends and in community with a lot of victims advocates. Like, people do harm in the process of surviving harm all the time. And if you've ever been friends with someone who has experienced a rape trauma, then you might have also experienced them being them lashing out at you. Yeah. And that's real. It doesn't, I'm not making that point to make a point, besides inviting us to sit with the nuance and complexity of harm and of the ripple effects. I'm not saying anybody's good or bad or righteous or not.
Yeah. Or they should or shouldn't do that thing. It's just,
thank you. Yes. Yeah. No, I'm not saying that. Like, I really try to avoid normatives, you know, like I try to avoid shoulds. I invite us to consider the harm of all of our actions, including going to a sex party when you like are noticing yourself in a compulsive pattern of hunting, including going to an ecstatic dance when you notice yourself as like hunting for the hot women and then like going directly beelining to them and then going to the next one. Like, I invite us to consider and notice. You know? Yeah. So yeah. No judgment. No judgment.
This is such an interesting conversation. I want to keep going just for a little bit longer because there's some pieces I want to bring in.
Rock and roll. Thank you. Thank you for this.
So it seems like one of the prerequisites for growth and actual healing and change and repair is that we'll just use like the man, like you work with men, like the man needs to want to understand, right? Ultimately, it seems like the man will need to be able to hear and receive feedback without getting defensive. Like ultimately, maybe, I don't know, what would you say to that? Like
ideally, but like one of the parts of doing my work is being satisfied and indeed thrilled with incremental change. You know, like a lot of people are like, great, Misha, you can create the transformation that we all want to see in our male leader who's really problematic. And then like, if he just works with you after 10 or 20 sessions, like he'll just never be defensive and never be problematic and never have like an politically incorrect thought. And that will be the indicator that he's now safe and we can bring him back. Mm-hmm. But my friends, I'm here to tell you that that's not how it works. I wish it were. That would be cool if I had the magic wand. Yeah. But it's not, right? Like people are complicated. They'll take 2 steps forward, 1 step back. They'll get re-triggered by something and then go back into their defensive patterns. Yes, I'd say the skills to build, that we're all human, fallible people building the skills, but the skills to take very seriously in building are the skills of proactively seeking feedback, of being energetically attuned to the invitation in your body to feedback so that people feel energetically, oh, Misha will take it really well. And people around you will vouch, right? So one of my big kind of like successes in this is when like a woman had a problem with me from like a play party 3 years ago where I was just a little clingy with one of her partners and she noticed it and felt like really energetically misattuned and felt like, oh, Misha, you were trying to get in on the group thing. And she was right. And she held on to that for 3 years, you know? And in recalling it, I was like, oh yeah, I was clingy that night. Like, and I will own that. And I've done work on that since. And like, but like the victory was her going to people about me and then being like, you should go straight to Misha. I am confident that he'll be able to take it well. And I've done this for some of mine. Like, and this is like really honestly one of the litmus tests for like getting close to me as a man, for being a friend of mine, is if a woman came to me to complain about you, would I feel confident saying, oh, you can go directly to Bob. Like, I am confident that Bob will take your feedback well and he'll take it seriously. He won't gaslight you. He won't minimize. He won't deflect. He won't get defensive. That's a standard for me, for friendship. But it's a skill that I invite any man to work on. Frankly, I invite any human to work on it. Defensiveness is beyond gender. But like, especially men in positions of leadership or power or authority or rank, right? Even if they're not formally in authority, like, where do you hold influence and power?
Yeah. That's such a big thing. Yeah. I would like to think that my friends would say that to people if somebody went to them, like, cause that's super fucking important to me. Like, integrity is very, very, very important to me, especially as a sex educator, as somebody who is in explorative spaces on occasion, you know, like, I really want to be that guy. Like, you know, and I think it's
the way it landed, and maybe, and right. And like, but like, will Taylor be able to hold it?
Totally.
Maybe hold my projection without flipping it back on me, like doing that weird fucked up neo-tantra guru thing of being like, oh, this is your stuff.
Totally.
I hear you, like, just like putting the mirror right up in their face and be, you know, which is super fucked up and like not okay, right? You have to be able to say, oh, thank you for sharing. Like, let me look at what is here for me.
And if people are looking for metrics, you know, like measurable things, like, I think what you just said, like, that is a metric right there. Like, that it should be a standard that like anybody in a leadership position, ideally all people, but like, especially if you're in any sort of leadership position, like, that should be something you should be striving for, I think.
Yes, you know? I 100%. Like, I mean, I hesitate to use like kind of like table stakes language because I feel it's too extreme or ultimatum-y. And I think it doesn't take into account us as humans. But like, if I had to say, I'd say table stakes is that. Like, table stakes for leadership is like a proactive approach to feedback and a ability to genuinely commit to welcoming it with curiosity and gratitude rather than defensiveness.
And if you're not able to,
and genuine, right? Because no matter what the words are, right? Like, have you ever heard that? Right? There's like a great episode of The Office where Michael Scott gets some feedback about his coffee breath, and he's like, "Well, I'll work on that." Right? You know, right? Saying the right thing in the wrong energy is actually worse, right? It's worse.
For sure. And some people will try the technique of saying the right thing just to make it be over with more quickly, you know, but then,
and that's worse.
And that's worse. And then that will have an impact that people will feel, and then it'll create the ripple effect, et cetera, et cetera.
And at the risk of being reviewy or redundant, like, it's worse because it creates incoherence. People like, it is a very destructive thing for the people around you, for your words not to match your energy. Right? Yeah. It creates incoherence. It's one of the core trauma triggers.
Yeah.
He's saying it's okay, but I can feel in my body it's not.
Yeah.
No good.
Yeah. So this is one of the pieces you said in the other interviews, something to the effect of like, if I'm a leader, then I have to match my behavior with the projections that I'm putting out into the world.
Right? Oh yeah. Let's talk about projections for sure. You mentioned this at the outset too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, whatever I'm presenting myself as, my behavior has to match that. Otherwise it's problems happen, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's so right. And like, so like, you know how I was saying earlier that the harm of being a progressive and feminist man and then doing some sketchy stuff around sex is like exacerbated like by an order of magnitude. The harm of doing some sketchy stuff around sex when you're a fucking consent educator is exacerbated by multiple orders of magnitude. The level of betrayal that people will feel is intense, right? People come to alternative communities, ecstatic dance, yoga, Burning Man, intentional communities, co-ops, you name it, right? Churches, because they want to escape, in part, the kind of moral depravity of our capitalist, legalistic world, right? They want to be in community where we can relax into our trust of each other. So when the person that they've placed trust in to be progressive, to share their values, does the same fucked up shit as the default world guys, it causes more harm. And I needed to emphasize this because like I've had a lot of clients who are super confused. They're like, well, wait a sec, I'm a feminist. I've done all this feminist stuff. I've like elevated women to like positions of leadership, right? And why don't I get the benefit of the doubt? Like, why don't I get, like, I'm not going out there and aggressively violating people, but it turns out that like when a man that you trust and love, right, takes advantage, or maybe let's just say when a man that you trust and love, like cops a feel, it's actually often more psychologically detrimental than when that man that you didn't know at a nightclub in Miami tried to assault you, because there was no trust in Miami. You didn't expect that guy to be ethical. There's no betrayal. It's just like, oh, that was just a scary, scary guy. That was scary. But this was betrayal. I trusted him. I let my guard down energetically. This is also true for a lot of microaggressions and racism, right? Like a lot of racist statements, right? Like when your friends, right, say something racist, it's way worse than like when some rando says something racist, right?
Totally.
Like, so like the more progressive you are, especially that you can proclaim yourself to be, the more dangerous you are.
And the more responsibility you have.
Yeah, I mean, I'm phrasing it in a little bit more of an aggressive way, but yes, the more responsibility you have. Yeah, and I do that intentionally, like to draw our attention. You can't proclaim values and then not live up to them without causing a lot of harm.
Yeah.
So be careful about the values that you proclaim.
Totally. Yeah. And to me, this, like what we're talking about right here, like some people, if you're still listening, like you're not in this camp, but some people will dismiss it and say like, oh, well, that's just like, there's a bug flying around me. That's just sort of like woke new age, like people trying to like figure out the best things to do or like how to judge people, et cetera. And also, but I really feel like to me, this is a spiritual practice. Like it's because it's really, what is the impact that I am having on the world? Like what's the impact I'm having on my community? What is it positive? Am I causing harm? Like more so than any state of consciousness I can achieve, like what is the ripple effect that I'm doing and creating? And like that to me is the practice. Like if I could make a spiritual practice for everyone and prescribe it, like that would be it, you know?
Well, I mean, and I for my clients who veer towards spirituality, I talk about this as a spiritual practice. I talk about this as a way of connecting, like, you know, to being a channel for divine light and for grace. And, you know, for my Jewish clients, I talk about tikkun olam and the idea of healing the world through our actions. For my clients from a more political liberationary bent or liberatory bent, I talk about this as being praxis, as being liberational practice, especially for white men, that this is actually a form of revolutionary action to like accountability as revolutionary action, accountability as liberation. For my more executive clients, I talk about this as leadership skills. I talk about this as a way of demonstrating evolved 21st century masculine leadership, of being in a position of power that recognizes it. I use examples of other leaders that are deeply respected, and I talk about how this creates stronger teams, like sends messages downstream to others that like this is the kind of place where it's actually not just safe, but encouraged to call out your leaders, you know? And that tends to create a lot more trust, especially if you're trying to build a team with people from a diverse variety of backgrounds that trust each other with a white guy in charge. You really have to be thinking about this. Yeah. So I think it applies across. Yeah, I think thinking about harm and impact applies across worlds.
Yeah. So I want to move towards closure here and talk about one last sort of thematic thing while we're doing that, which is some amount of going into repair and apology and how to do that. I think that's a super important piece. You said something, it's maybe a quote. I think you said something, I don't think it's actually possible to be accountable without a whole lot of dignity. And I love that. And then you also said, I don't trust the apology from someone who hates themselves. And
I did say that, didn't I?
Yeah, which is interesting, but also like what I think it points to, what I heard in that is that there's this sort of generative place you could get to if you're somebody who's been called out, or it's been said that you've caused harm. There's a place where you could go into a shame spiral, and maybe you do that. Maybe you have your emotional release, but at some point you can transmute that or change that into, actually, you know what? Like, I want to be a really integral person in the world. Like, my integrity is important to me. My impact is important to me. So then there's this dignity that comes from that. And rather than saying, oh, I'm so bad, I'm so sorry, I'm horrible, you say, wow, like, I messed up, I am sorry, like, I own that, etc. Like different flavor. Right?
Yeah. Well, and I think actually the dignity comes from being committed to your own integrity, but I think the dignity actually comes from a place of, there's this great quote, and I forget the name of the, Seth Godin. No matter what you've done, it's still your responsibility to contribute your gifts to the world. That's the dignity. No matter what you've done, it's still your responsibility to contribute your gifts to the world. You have a gift to give. I guarantee you, every man listening knows that they have a gift to give to this world and make a contribution in their lives, and that they want to.
Yeah. And I imagine, sorry, go ahead.
Please.
And I imagine, like, the fear of getting called out or said that you've caused harm is ultimately translated into the fear that you won't be able to give the gift and have the impact on the world. Therefore, better to shove away and keep giving the gift than actually deal with it and be able to,
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I think part of the fear that a call out creates is, oh my God, I have this gift to give. I know that, I'm sure for you and me, right? If we were to get called out, like, part of the fear that we would experience would be, well, right? We've got these podcasts and these classes that you run. Like, what if I don't get to do that? Like, that was my dharma. That was like the thing that I was meant to do.
Yeah.
It's deep. Sorry, without projecting onto you, like, it would be deeply hard for me to, like, consider not being able to speak on podcasts and, like, do the writing and the teaching and the coaching and the consulting that I do. I mean, I finally found my purpose in life,
Yeah.
So I hold that with delicacy. But yeah, there's a deep dignity in knowing that, like, it's still my responsibility to contribute those gifts and to do so in a way that's in integrity. So I think part of approaching repair, I think I really want to emphasize what you said, is doing your emotional processing separately. I don't have better, like, with your therapist, with your coach, with your best friends, like, screaming, calling them names. Like, I really am a deep believer in, like, politically incorrect emotional processing done in safe contexts and containers.
Yeah.
Like, I really think that that's important. Like, none of the successes I've experienced with my clients or my clients have experienced through me would come if they hadn't gotten some pretty toxic shit out at some point.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And this, like, let it emerge from their system without it being like a logical thing of, like, oh, like, this is, like, evidence that you're bad or that you have wrong think, But, like, no, just, like, and then show up for the repair from a place of having already expressed that and had it witnessed, ideally.
Yeah.
Maybe by your journal or by your God, or by your community, in a healthy way, and then show up for the repair. I mean, I could talk about repair for so long, but, like, one of the big things is to show up for repair without the agenda of, like, show up for repair in the same way that we show up for sex, right? Without agenda. Like, I think it's actually can be detrimental to assign, it's like, okay, well, here's what I'm trying to get out of this. It's like, okay, you can sort of go there, but, like, I think showing up for repair with the right energy is more important than showing up with the right agenda. Because sometimes, like, and I see this happen all the time, and it's one of the reasons that it fucks up, like, mediations that happen too soon after the event.
Yeah.
People are like, what's my agenda? My agenda is to get resolution. My agenda is to get out of trouble. My agenda is to be cool again. Like, I don't want this to be a thing anymore. I'd like this to stop being a thing. I'd like you to be okay with me. And even having that as your agenda going in, if you've done harm, could be the kind of energy that will do more harm.
Yeah.
Right. Totally. So I see this happen all the time where, like, they go into the mediation and she's like, oh, he'll finally get me. he'll finally receive me. And he's like, I just want to say whatever I need to say to get out of trouble.
Totally.
And then the energies are mismatched and he hasn't done enough processing and, and then it ends up being worst, right? So this is like number one, most preventable mistakes, apologizing too quickly until you've taken the time to grok it. And, and really I advise doing as much preemptive emotional labor as you can, like really putting yourself in the shoe. Like, yes, like if someone wants to share their pain with you, great. Like, you should be able to hold that pain and do what Danielle Sered, who I quote all the time, she's the founder of Common Justice, which is a Brooklyn-based restorative justice organization. She calls standing in the fire of accountability, which is sitting with someone telling you the pain that you caused them and just fucking standing in that fire.
Yeah.
Which is so hard. It's a fire.
Totally.
No defensiveness. No, oh, but you also hurt me, or oh, like it's not that big a deal, but I didn't have this good experience in childhood one time where kids beat me up. Like, just thank you. What else? Right? Yeah. I think it's really important to engage in that, what I call it, speculative empathy. I imagine this person might have experienced this. I imagine this person might have experienced this. I'm not going to assume that I know their experience, but given everything I know about them, I imagine that like when I did that, they probably experienced maybe some betrayal, some sense of like distrust, like, oh, like if Misha did this and like, how can I trust him to be a consent educator? God, like, and then how can I trust this organization that's endorsed him as a consent educator? Yeah. I imagine you experienced all those thoughts and that must have sucked for you. Oh, totally. I can go so much, like we're not even, we don't, I don't know if we have the time to go into like, but apology practice and restoration practice is like a huge part of my work.
Yeah. I'd say, you know what, I'd say like, if you have the time, people can break this episode up into chunks. So I think it could be useful. Like because possibly there's somebody listening right now who's like, man, I'm really taking notes. I really want to get this stuff. Like, sure. I'd say let's round, like if we can do that in 15 minutes, you got it. Whatever we can round out to provide some actionable something, like I'd say let's do it.
Yeah. So, okay. If you've done harm and you know it and you want to make it better, right? The first thing is to be with your own body, be with yourself, like be with the experience of doing harm and make sure that you're not coming from a place of like, I'm a shit piece of shit, So not self-flagellating, that expression, like self-hitting. And also, right, welcome and acknowledge the various politically incorrect feelings that you'll inevitably get. Like one of the first things that happens after I do harm to someone is I look at them through a red lens. And I'm like, what a oversensitive, judgy piece, that's my internal process. I think most people's internal process is that we start hating the person we harmed. It's a defense mechanism. It's quite common. Accept it, recognize it, notice it, let it pass through you, right? Let it come through you. Some level of like hitting a pillow or some sort of like expression, going to someone, having a big cry, being really self-centered in your cry. All of this should be done privately, not with the person you harmed, right? Lots of pre-work. Restorative justice people call this prep. You prep before you go into the circle. You really look not just at like where, like the inquiry is where you were out of integrity. That's usually the best, most fruitful place to start. A lot of people call this, what did I do wrong? But wrong tends to like apply to like an objective set of standards. Did I break a law? Did I violate a norm within the community? That can be useful as an inquiry, but like it's also, I find it much more useful to be like, what did I do that was out of my own standards? And usually for this inquiry, it's useful to assume that there was something, right? Like part of my practice, you talk about preventative practices, we asked at the early set. One of my preventative practices is whenever anybody gives me feedback, I assume that it's all true. All of it. And I just sit with that. It takes me anywhere between an hour and a week to just, that stage. And it's the worst. It's the worst because like I'm consciously tearing down my own internal defenses, like all of my like armor that I've like naturally created for myself to be like, dismiss that one. That's not real. And just like allow it in. and allow it to be true. Like, what if this were like, what if they're seeing a side of me that I'm not even, oh God, it's the worst, especially if you don't trust them. If you're like, this person's like not a good judge of character and I don't trust their judgment. They're just seeing a side of me that like, you know, is just a facet, you know, and it's not really me. Ooh, okay.
Yeah.
You've done that work. Now let's say you've seen it and you've seen where you were out of integrity. You've seen where like, oh, it's important to me to be compassionate and I wasn't. It's important to me to be thoughtful and to like really be like attuned and I wasn't attuned. Okay. When you like, I advise people to write out the restoration, even if they end up delivering it verbally. I advise people to take the time to write it out. And then in terms of like venue for delivery or vehicle for delivery, written, oral, in person, etc., is I think really a context based. Some people hate written. Some people hate to receive written. They're like, this is dispassionate or cold. Some people would really appreciate it because it's like, oh, this is complicated and I have complicated feelings and I want to be able to sit with your words.
Yeah.
And I know that if we talk, like my instinct will be to like immediately tell you it's okay. When you engage in the repair, I have a whole practice on this, but it's name the action. Don't apologize for impact. Name the action. And then when you apologize for what you did, not for how they felt, not for what happened, but what you did. I am sorry that I hit you. Not, I'm sorry that you were hurt. Yeah. I'm sorry that you felt bad. Right? So we use this in English all the time. We say, I'm sorry that you're feeling that bad. I'm sorry your father died. In an apology letter, really. You with me?
Yeah. Except the one piece, just to clarify, like that I see in some people is like we talked to earlier, just want to name it like, oh, maybe they didn't hit the person. Maybe it's not like they have a hard time clearly identifying it, in which case I think go back and possibly listen to the earlier part of this episode again. You know?
Yeah. Well, like, how about like, I'm sorry that I disrespected you, right? I generally, one of my more advanced techniques is to like name the action that happened. And then when you apologize for the more overarching theme of the thing that you did that was most impactful. Like, I workshopped one recently where it was a man with his partner and he took off the toll like sticker thing that like allowed and without telling them, and then the person like got a ticket because, right? And it was like, like what happened was I took off the toll sticker thing on the car without telling you. That's what happened. But what I'm sorry for is that I'm sorry that I took away your sovereignty, because it's something that we've talked about a lot.
Got it. Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Totally.
That's where the juice is. That's where the resonance is.
Yeah.
Right? That's what the person wants to hear. Not, I'm sorry for this incidental little thing, because the incidental thing of the thing, it's right in the context of our marriage, is representative of all the other shit. Right. And so like, Do you get the impact, right? Do you get the gestalt, the holistic thing? And that's the advanced technique, is to apologize for that.
Totally.
Name the impact, right? Engage in the speculative empathy, engage in like reflection of, right? This is where your nonviolent communication skills can come in, of like, I heard you say that you were hurt in this specific way, betrayed, felt violated, whatever it was. And then you can say like, this is how you felt. This is what your experience was. It's better generally to take away phrases like you felt this. Better to use direct language of like, this was violating to you, or you were violated, or I violated you. People are pretty resilient when you say I violated you. People generally tend to, especially in relationship, tend to respect that and tends to land pretty decently. So we've done the apology, we've done naming the action, we've done naming the incoherence, and we've talked about naming the impact. And then the final two steps are repair and prevention. What am I doing to repair it, right? What am I doing to make it better? I'm going to pay the toll. I'm going to pay for your therapy. I'm taking classes from an accountability coach. I'm taking classes with Taylor. Maybe it's indirect. Maybe I was pushy in part because I don't have good control of my sexual urges. And so it's not about like learning to apologize better. It's about like, actually, that's the reparative act, right? Or rather, that's more of a preventative action, right? The preventative action is gaining better control of my own sexuality. That's a journey that I've seen now from this incident that I need to go on.
Yeah. So just to say also, with a number of the women that I've talked to over the years who've experienced some sort of harm from somebody, like one of the biggest important things that they really desire is evidence that the man is changing the behavior going forward. And that inherently is part of the repair process.
Right. Totally. Oftentimes prevention can feel reparative.
Totally.
Right. Yeah. So I say that by saying, and sometimes there's actual reparative steps.
For sure.
It depends depending on the context, depending on the harm, depending on but yes, oftentimes everything in prevention functions as repair, but you don't get to skip over the repair as well. You have to think about the actual incident as well. Yeah, but then prevention can look really, really creative. A lot of people get stuck on these last two steps. A lot of people feel like, oh, I won't do it again. The promise not to do it again works once.
Yeah.
And then you kind of have to get a little bit more creative and a little bit more serious. You have to really take it seriously. And it's tough, and we're all going to fuck up, and we all leave dishes in the sink still. You know what I mean? People are fallible, and you can take this stuff as seriously as it's possible. And it can be a giant vehicle for growth to really use these things as a vehicle to push yourselves forward. Some more advanced techniques briefly. Make sure that your apologies are consensual. Don't assault people with your apologies. Don't attack with your apology. Don't apologize at someone. Don't assume that your apology is enough. Don't assume you get it. Don't assume that you've encapsulated everything. I advise a double down technique of saying, now that I've apologized, what else is present for you? Right? Which is people are oh my God, whoa, really? I get to because I'm really interested. Is there something that I might have missed or something that I didn't really speak to? Take your time. Whoa, that's great. Don't ask for forgiveness. Please, this is a weird thing. Don't say, oh, please forgive me. I really don't like that. I don't think anybody really does. If they'll make it okay if when they're good and ready. And I think pressuring someone to forgive you, first of all, is pressure, which sucks to feel pressured about anything, right? Especially if your original harm had to do with pressure and sex, right? Second of all, it makes it about you, right? Asking for forgiveness fundamentally makes the apology a transaction. It says, now that I have given you gold, you will now give me a horse, right?
Yeah.
And the forgiveness is almost legalistic. It's now you've forgiven me, you can't bring this up again. Mm-hmm. Fuck all that. I offer this to you without expectations. I offer this to you without strings. It's important for me. This is the framing, and this I got from my anti-racism mentor, the Reverend Bridge Feltis at the Intersection for Mankind, if you're curious, is the idea of restoring integrity rather than apologizing. It was important to me to restore my integrity, and part of that was making the corrective actions and the reparative actions and the preventative actions, and part of it is also offering you this restoration, these words. But I needed to restore my integrity. Thank you for witnessing me. You don't this isn't just to pacify you. Mm-hmm. This isn't just right. And if you come at it with that angle, it tends to land a lot better because people are oh, this is about him wanting to do better rather than him just trying to make me not mad at him and get out of trouble.
Yeah.
There it is. Quick and dirty.
Boom. Man, thank you so much. Such a rich, in-depth, interesting conversation. I really hope this has provided a resource for you, listener, watcher, for people out there. I'm going to go through and put different timestamps throughout the episode so people can go to different sections. And there's this one last piece that I'm oh, if I didn't say this, I would be kicking myself. It's happened in a friend circle within the last couple of years. There was a scenario between two partners, and one partner did something, the other partner felt hurt by it. And the partner who did the action that hurt the other partner didn't want to apologize. They didn't want to say, I'm sorry, because their thought was, well, if I say I'm sorry, then I'm admitting that I'm bad or fault or something, and that I can grieve the action and impact, but without wanting to admit or say that I did something wrong because I don't think I did something wrong. I'm curious what happens for you when you hear that.
Yeah. Oh, it's really common. Yeah. I mean, I don't know the context or the
totally. I didn't give you enough really to go on, but
no, but it's okay. Yeah. I'll take it a couple places. One is, to the degree possible, I invite us to remove the words and the concepts of allegation, accusation, guilt, innocence, right and wrong. Right?
Yeah.
If part of the resistance is apologizing because that makes me wrong, right? That's already the big inquiry, right? That's the big thing of like, you can do harm without being bad, right? Which is what I'm hearing in that. But there's also the whole idea of like admitting fault or admitting wrong, right? So I would put it into the language of like, what was the action in the context of your own integrity, you know?
Yeah.
And like, maybe the action itself that they're pointing to wasn't out of your integrity, but maybe there was something in the way that you did it or in the context surrounding it that was out of your integrity. Like, it wasn't out of my integrity not to call you because I don't feel an obligation to call you, but it was important to me to set better expectations about what kinds of phone communication you could expect from me, and I didn't do that, or something.
Totally.
I without knowing anything about what you're talking about, I really don't.
Sure.
But like, yeah, no, the inquiry, make it the inquiry about their own integrity and their own values as much as possible in general is a good approach. Taking it out of the context of right and wrong.
I like that. Yeah.
And let's end on that. I really want to mention that, like, it's so important not to think you're bad by looking at harm. Like, I hope to be an embodiment of that. I say with deep humility, to be an embodiment of loving yourself while also recognizing your capacity to do harm and the reality of the harm that you have caused in the past. I invite other men to step into that form of leadership. And I invite you, the water is warm. It's okay.
Beautiful. Thank you. Misha, we'll put all the links and methods for people to get in touch with you in the description of this episode, as well as you have a really awesome resource around how to apologize that outlines a lot of the things you just spoke to in a really beautifully written way. It's on your website. You can find that on your website. Anything else you want to share about how to find you?
I'll have some in-depth Zoom courses coming up in the fall. I'm designing one that's just for leaders that really delves into the topics that we talked about today.
Yeah.
I'm really excited to launch that. It's not yet launched, but please follow me on Instagram at Misha Byrick. And that's by far the best ways to stay in touch with me. You can also sign up for my mailing list, which is on my website, evolve.men. And so go to evolve.men and there's a beautiful world waiting for you, and I'll see you there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks
you
for being here. Yeah. Thank you, listener. Thank you, watcher. Thank you, human. I'll see you next time.